Hi, my name is Amaya Jenkins, and for my Comp 435 final project, I will be discussing the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. In May 2021, Colonial Pipeline was a victim of a ransomware attack carried out by a group known as DarkSide that led to a 6-day shutdown of the pipeline. This attack was all over the news, so I'm sure many of you have heard of it. But before we dive deeper into the attack, let's gather all the background information we need to fully understand it. Let's start off with who exactly is the Colonial Pipeline Company. They are a company based in Alpharetta, Georgia, and the pipeline is among the largest and most critical oil pipelines in the country. The pipeline consists of more than 5,500 miles of pipeline starting in Houston, Texas, and ending at the port of New York and New Jersey. On a daily basis, the pipeline is responsible for delivering an average of 100 million gallons of refined oil products like gasoline, jet fuel, and home heating oil. Now you're probably wondering, who is this DarkSide group that attacked Colonial? They are a criminal group whose first publicly reported activity occurred in August 2020. It's known that one of the primary ways this group operates is according to a ransomware as a service model, or RAAS for short. The group originated in Russia but is not affiliated with or sponsored by any nation state, meaning they attack Colonial Pipeline of their own volition. But they have been known to only target non-Russian speaking countries in their attacks. Now that we know who exactly the victim and the attackers are, there are a few pieces of technical knowledge that you might need to know to completely understand the attack. First, what is ransomware? Ransomware is malware or malicious software that is intentionally harmful to a computer and/or system that encrypts a victim's information and holds it for ransom. When attackers perpetrate this kind of attack, they make sure that the information is encrypted in a way that prevents the victim from accessing any of it, increasing the chances that the victim will indeed pay the ransom. If the victim pays the ransom and the attackers hold up their end of the forced deal, they give the victim a decryption key so they can regain access to their information. This type of malware is designed to quickly spread throughout a network, targeting critical databases and file servers in the effort of completely paralyzing the entire organization. Next, let's talk about what a VPN is. This knowledge will come in handy when going over the attack vector. So VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. This virtual private network provides privacy and anonymity by creating a private network from a public internet connection. The VPN masks your IP address and, most importantly, establishes a secure and encrypted connection, which is how they are able to provide such privacy. Companies will use VPNs to create a secure way of accessing their protected network in hopes of guaranteeing that accesses and contributions to their private network will indeed be secure. The last bit of technical knowledge you need to understand is the function and importance of single-factor authentication versus two- or multi-factor authentication. Single-factor authentication allows users to authenticate their identity by providing only one form of identification. This would be like just providing your username and password to log in to one of your online accounts, such as a social media platform or perhaps even your bank's website. Two- or multi-factor authentication allows users to authenticate their identity by requiring them to provide at least two different means of authentication. For this type of authentication, a user would not be able to access whatever network, account, or whatever they're trying to access without having all of the correct means of authentication. Adding these additional layers to the authentication process of one's identity strengthens the security of whatever system a user is trying to access. Now that we have this background and technical knowledge, let's get into the attack vector of the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. So on April 29, 2021, the attackers were able to gain access to Colonial Pipeline's networks using a legacy VPN system. This VPN system did not use multi-factor authentication, and because of this, the attackers were able to gain access by using a single compromised password for an account that was no longer in use. It is still not 100% certain how exactly the attackers obtained this information or this compromised password, but the password was discovered in a batch of compromised passwords on the dark web. This insinuates that the previous employee who held this password had likely used the same password for another account that was hacked. On May 6th, the attackers launched their attack against Colonial by stealing almost 100 gigabytes of data a week after they first gained entry into Colonial systems. A day later, on May 7th at 5 a.m., a Colonial employee became aware that the attackers had infected their systems with ransomware when they saw a ransom note. This ransom note demanded cryptocurrency in exchange for the decryption key needed to decrypt and recover their stolen data. After this employee found evidence of this attack and an operations supervisor was notified, Colonial started the process of shutting down the pipeline, and the pipeline was entirely shut down by 6:10 a.m. Colonial decided to shut down the pipeline because they were unsure of the extent of the attack and decided to prevent the attackers from gaining any further access to their systems by completely shutting down the pipeline. Colonial announced that their systems had been breached on May 8th. Shortly after the attack was discovered, Colonial decided to pay the ransom, resulting in them paying DarkSide the $4.4 million they demanded in order to gain access to the decryption key needed to decrypt and recover the stolen data. Colonial also called in Mandiant, a security investigation firm, to help investigate the attack. The FBI, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, Department of Homeland Security, and the U.S. Department of Energy were also contacted by Colonial and brought in on the investigation. Mandiant found that the attackers had indeed moved around in Colonial systems, but there was no evidence that they had been able to breach any of the more critical operational systems of the pipeline. Due to this finding, Mandiant and Colonial began considering opening the pipeline back up. The Colonial pipeline remained shut down until May 12th. About a month after the attack, on June 7th, the Department of Justice was able to recover 63.7 Bitcoin, which is approximately $2.3 million of the ransom Colonial paid the attackers. And on June 8th, the congressional hearing of the attack began, where the CEO of Colonial Pipeline, Joseph Blount, had to explain how the attack occurred. This panel was assembled to examine the threats of critical U.S. infrastructure, specifically Colonial in this case. Let's look at some of the impacts of this attack. The primary impact was that Colonial Pipeline was out of $4.4 million as they were the target of the attack and paid the ransom. Some of the secondary impacts include the increase in panic buying of gasoline by citizens in the affected areas. That also caused there to be extremely long lines at gas stations and an overall shortage of gasoline. Since the Colonial Pipeline was also responsible for delivering jet fuel, this attack caused there to be a shortage of jet fuel, causing many airlines to delay and cancel flights. As mentioned earlier, this attack also caused Colonial Pipeline to be subject to a congressional hearing. The two tertiary impacts of this attack include the rise of gasoline prices and the increase of concern regarding ransomware attacks in general. Before we end our discussion of this attack, I wanted to discuss the motivation surrounding this attack. This attack was carried out by DarkSide for purely financial gain, just like many other cyber attacks are. While the attacker's motivation is important, I also want to express my motivation for studying this attack and the overall reason why we should study and care about this attack overall. As we have seen, this attack led to a multi-day long shutdown of a major pipeline that is a critical part of the infrastructure of our own country. This very public attack has proven to be a prime example of how ransomware can be a major threat to critical infrastructure that we as a society rely on. Studying this attack and others like it is something that we should be doing to help come up with ways to ensure our essential infrastructure is as secure as possible, and how to properly and effectively deal with such attacks, as complete prevention is not always possible. We can also learn a few things from Colonial's mistakes, like the seriousness of the risk password reuse causes, the importance of authentication with multiple layers, and the need for societal action against the growing number of ransomware attacks. As we wrap up the discussion of this attack, I want you to think about and answer these two questions. First, what do you think are some of the bigger implications of ransomware attacks? This could be Colonial the Colonial attack in general or others you may have heard about. And if you were responsible for Colonial Pipeline cybersecurity, what would you have done to prevent the attack, or what would you do now to prevent a similar attack from occurring again? I just wanted to thank you for listening. Bye.